the people who are against the right to keep and bear arms, they know they're never going to get a politician to just ban guns. So what they do is they incrementally make regulations to the point where it becomes A, cost prohibitive, or B, the high barrier to entry is so high.
A new bill, HD 4420.
This bill was the largest and most comprehensive gun control bill in the history of our country, and I would argue that it is the most anti-civil rights bill ever been presented.
Hello to everybody watching and listening. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Welcome to the Sons of Liberty podcast. I am Sam Mealy.
I'm Hunter Young.
And today we have got a very special guest joining us. Actually, we're joining you in your building. You hear the gunshots around. We're in a gun store, Cape Gunworks here in Cape Cod, Massachusetts. He's a respected man, well known in the community. He's an entrepreneur. He's a businessman, talk radio host sometimes. And he's actually an aspiring politician, which I would love to get into which, here in a little bit. And of course, you are best known, I hear, as the Ammo King. I saw something on the YouTube that was pretty cool. Toby Leary, honored to have you on the podcast today.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. I'm glad to be here. It's always fun to talk and bring our conversations in other venues and other places that wouldn't normally pop up or crop up. So I'm happy to talk about anything and everything. So whatever you guys got planned, I'm game. Aspiring politician, though, I don't know. That one feels a little weird because
it's new.
Yes, it's new, and I would say I decided to run for town office as a way to give back to my community. I don't know that I see that as a career path I am looking to reinvent myself in, but you never know.
You never know.
You never know. I've already reinvented myself several times throughout my life, so anything's possible at this point. I guess I wouldn't even be surprised.
Yeah, that's actually a good segue. I was curious. I wanted to start off just with your background. I mean, like I did say, you own a gun store right now, Cape Gunworks. And amazing store. Like I believe it's the largest gun store, at least on Cape Cod. I don't know.
Certainly, probably in Massachusetts.
That's awesome. That is amazing. In terms of like size, revenue, like inventory, or
I would say size and offerings.
Okay.
There's probably some other shops out there in the Metro West area that do higher dollar volume than us, but it's a much different demographic and paradigm. Ours is more of a complete package, if you will. So like we offer the license to carry classes, we offer the how to shoot your gun classes, we offer non-lethal classes, we offer all kinds of classes, and then also we have a range attached to the shop. That's why you hear the gunfire, and we do a lot of one-on-one individual training and instruction, and then we also have a retail shop. So those three legs to the stool is what makes Cape Gunworks. So we have training, retail, and the range. So that's really what it comes down to.
How long have you been here?
We've been in this building for about 6.5 years.
Okay. How did you get into this? Were you working for gun stores before, or was
No.
this something that kind of just came about?
No, it's a good question. My real job is I've been in construction my entire life. When I was 5 years old, I knew I was going to be a carpenter when I grew up, and I went to tech school and was happy working for people, but had this little weird entrepreneurial itch. So I went out on my own when I was like 18 years old and worked for 2 years, but had no idea how to run a business, how to balance do a balance sheet or a profit and loss or any of that. Plus, there's all kinds of other stuff that like insurances and taxes and big adult stuff, So at 18 years old, I was ill prepared for the real world as far as business is concerned. So I worked for 2 years for myself, and then I went to work for another builder for about 7 years and kind of learned the administrative side of the construction business. And then I thought I'd retire from that company, and one day I just had this overwhelming itch again to do it for myself. So I started a company. We just celebrated our 20th year in business, Toby Leary Fine Woodworking, and so we're that's still going strong. And then about a little over 10 years ago, my business partner and I, and I've been a lifelong hunter and gun enthusiast and advocate, if you will, since I was probably 12 years old and first started shooting in the Boy Scouts. Ironically, my parents wouldn't even let me get a BB gun.
Wow.
They knew my nature, and so I had to
Play with fire.
roam the woods with sticks and slingshots that I made myself. But I couldn't get a gun until I was 18. So, but again, I was an enthusiast. It was in me. I really loved to shoot, loved to hunt, and then Brendan and I, he's my business partner at Cape Gunworks. We went on a trip to Vegas with a friend, and while we were there, we did a 2-day defensive handgun class, and then on the plane back, we both were like, this needs to come east. We need to do this out on the East Coast. And Cape Cod really needs a good, strong gun store and whatnot. So we kind of whiteboarded it. We got out the notebook and we started to scratch out a business plan, which we ended up writing. And then we decided to get the ball rolling. We applied for our license to operate a gun store in the state, local, and federal level. And so it took about a year to get all the licenses in. And we opened in the gun store, in the woodworking shop. We had this little closet under the stairs. And that was the gun store. And
Wow.
You open the door, and to this day, there's shelves in there where a bunch of old binders are and paperwork. And the shelves say like 9mm, 40, 45, so that's where I stashed all the ammo and the few guns we had in inventory. And it was all by appointment. But then we found a little retail shop. We were trying to pitch this idea of Cape Gunworks to banks. Mm-hmm. And they kind of nodded and smiled and said, yeah, that sounds great. Good luck with that. Once you figure it out, come back and see us. And we realized we weren't going to get funding with no customer base, no business records, whatsoever. So we started a little like mom and pop retail operation in an old bank right in front of my woodworking shop. Okay. And so we went in there and we opened on July 5th, 2014. And we had kind of emptied the life savings between the two of us. And we had some little plastic displays, glass displays that looked like fish tanks. And they had a couple shelves in them and would spread out the guns, like 2 on this shelf, 1 on this shelf, maybe 3 on the bottom shelf. And to make it look like we had more, we stretched them out. So, because it was a pathetic offering for opening the doors, I think we probably had a total of 10 or 15 guns in the whole store, and we're calling ourselves a gun store. And I remember ordering ammunition and being like, we need to get some 9mm. And the guy on the other end of the phone at the distributor would be like, how many cases do you want? I'm like, cases? I want like 10 boxes. So I don't want to, I can't afford to get 10 cases. So we were trickling it in, but started selling. And really, we just were trying to offer good customer service and build that customer base, and that happened very quickly. So we had something to go to the bank with.
So there was a market for it here in Cape Cod, and the banks thought that there wasn't. Is that kind of?
Well, the banks didn't. Number one, they probably were scared off by the fact that it was guns. Number two, there was a thing going on in the federal government called Operation Choke Point, where they grouped gun stores in financially with marijuana growers, strip clubs, pornographers, and other high-risk, what they call high-risk businesses. Ours is a legit business. The other ones, maybe not.
Even though guns are legal,
Guns are constitutional.
Yeah.
They're enumerated in our nation's constitution, and all of a sudden, banks wouldn't lend. Banks wouldn't lend because the Obama administration wanted to find ways of restricting guns, and so they used this financial aspect. So all these national banks, in fact, one of the ones on Cape Cod that funded a local competitor actually pulled the account and said, you got to get your money out of our bank because of this Operation Choke Point. There's still remnants of that lingering, but it's not really an issue anymore. But so there was that we were fighting against. Yeah. Then the fact that we were just unproven. We had this big dream. We're asking for millions of dollars and nothing to show for it. They're like, yeah, okay, the dream is good. The business plan looks great. We don't know if it's going to work. Yeah. It's not like something that they have a portfolio of lending to, gun stores. They have a portfolio of restaurants and, builders and whatever other type of thing. But to the bank, we were just some new startup company that was too risky to lend to.
So you've had issues with banks and everything, and being too risky to have money lended to you. What about like on a political level? Have you had issues with the local government, maybe the state government, federal government, as far as just trying to encroach on your rights? Because I know we're in Massachusetts, not the most conservative place in the union.
Right.
What has been your history with like the politicians around here and the politics? I suppose.
I would say that actually hasn't been too much of a problem. We
That's
had a interesting thing happen right when we were starting out. Was the Barnstable public range closed. The town of Barnstable found out they didn't have any insurance there, and so, long story, but so they closed it, and it still has never reopened because of a bunch of other issues that have cropped up. So everybody was really upset at the town for closing this range that had been in continuous operation since probably before World War II.
Whoa.
And now no one could go shoot their guns.
Yep.
And so the town used us as like this deflection method. They were like, don't worry, there's a great company forming. They're going to do great. They're going to have an indoor range. This is still very preliminary on our end. But they were rolling out the red carpet for us, so to speak, because it
awesome.
took the heat off them.
So they just gave you that customer base that the banks were like, where's your base?
Well, we always knew about that base, if you will, but it was a deflection method for the town.
Mm-hmm.
When we first opened the gun store in my little woodworking shop, the local building inspector was like, nope, you can't open a gun store here. You don't have a right of the zone. And we're like, we're in one of the most generous business zones in the town called the Hyannis Gateway that allows for retail. Mm-hmm. And he's like, well, not firearms retail. Like, because it doesn't say firearm in front of retail means if I was opening a shoe store, you would let me, right? Yeah. Well, it doesn't say shoe retail. It just says retail, right? Right. Yeah. So that he knew he had to grant us the business license, but I had to hire an attorney to write him a letter and say they have a right of the zone. Yep. Issue the license.
Did he just not like guns? What was his deal?
Yeah, that was the thing. I think that some of the zoning people and some of the town officials were like, what? A gun store is going to open in town? Like, that's crazy. What are you, nuts? Like, you can't do that. And, of course, we can, and we did. And I think we put on a very good example of what a responsible establishment would look like. But, they had to put up the roadblock first. And so then when we opened Cape Gunworks, the range over here at this location, at our current location, again, they kind of rolled out the red carpet for us because that whole range shutdown was a problem. So I had no issues whatsoever getting permitting for this. But then before we opened is when all the issues cropped up by all the little, all the bureaucrats along the way that enforce whatever code issues you're dealing with. So we had some massive roadblocks right like the week before we opened. They were trying to delay it and cost us money and, bleed us out, if you will. And I don't think that was an official town position. It was more people's trying to justify their existence behind a desk or something.
It's interesting how you go into all the little things that are like the Operation Choke Point and the zoning laws they're trying to. It's interesting how people assume, I feel like, when they come after people who own guns, that there's just going to be a top-down kind of like, oh, if you're a gun owner, like, you got to give up your guns. But those are, I feel like, the little things that they're trying to just make it a little bit harder just to open up a gun store, a little bit harder. And I feel like that's how it started.
We call it in the industry death by 1,000 cuts. That's really what the people who are against the right to keep and bear arms aren't. They know they're never. It's kind of like the analogy is like what I just talked about, going to a bank trying to get a loan for this operation right out of the gate. Mm-hmm. I was never going to get that loan. And the anti-gun people know that they're not going to get a politician to just ban guns, right? Mm-hmm. So what they do is they incrementally make regulations to the point where it becomes A, cost prohibitive, or B, the high barrier to entry is so high, people just say forget it. or they're smart by doing it against businesses because that trickles down to the consumer. If you do it against the consumer, now you got to deal with 300 million people. Like in the state of Massachusetts, there's 600,000 gun owners, but there's, I think, 500 to 600 firearms related businesses. So they only have to regulate and control the 500 to 600 businesses on that front, where it's the death by 1,000 cuts. And we have, I'm probably jumping ahead, but we have bills before us right now that are along those lines, that just want to restrict and hamstring the business operation of the firearms industry in Massachusetts.
That's so interesting that instead, like you said, instead of going after the individual, because when you get the people mad, that's when you have a populist uprising, and the government can't handle that.
Right.
So they go after the businesses because it's easier to handle. That's so interesting.
Yeah.
That's very maniacal.
Yeah, and the big that was tested and I would say implemented almost to perfection on July 20th, 2016, when Maura Healey woke up and decided to enforce laws that don't exist on the books. She said that for too long, firearms manufacturers and dealers are getting away with a assault weapons ban that has been on the books since 2004. It was the federal assault weapons ban from 2004, and it sunsetted federally in 2014. I'm sorry, 94 is when the assault
under
weapons
Clinton,
ban
right?
went. Yeah, the 94 assault weapons ban went into effect. In 2004 is when it sunsetted federally. Massachusetts made it permanent in 98. So they decided to adopt the exact language of the federal assault weapons ban and then have it on the books because they knew in 2004 it was going to sunset. So they didn't want that to happen, so made it permanent. So Massachusetts has been living under the federal assault weapons ban since 1994. But in 2016, she decided to reinterpret it. She literally became judge, jury, and executioner all in one fell swoop. She acted as all three branches of government, the judiciary, the legislative, and the executive branch, by her edict. It was this order that she put out, and it was an assault weapons ban enforcement letter that she sent, again, to the dealers. She didn't send it out to the 600,000 gun owners, sent it to the dealers and said, if you continue to sell these guns, and they were guns that were legal for sale the entire time federally from 94 to 2004. Not another attorney general in all 50 states interpreted the bill the way that she interpreted it. Even the federal government didn't interpret it the way she interpreted it. And so she twisted it around and threatened the dealers that if you do this, your license will be subject to revocation. You'll be facing a 10-year prison sentence and up to $10,000 fine.
Wow.
And ironically, they're like, we're going to fine you first $10,000, and that's going to fund your own prosecution. I'm like, what other industry does that? Or how does, police can't arrest you and then levy your bank account to fund your own prosecution, right? Yeah. That's not the way this works. You're presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Yeah.
And but they're saying, and again, she was stretching the assault weapons ban definition in ways that have never been recognized by any other attorney general throughout the entire country in that 10-year period.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And now she's governor.
Yeah, now she's governor.
Yeah, so taking that was 2016.
Yep.
Let's bring it up to 2023. Now Maura Healey, no longer attorney general, she's governor of Massachusetts. And a new bill, I think this is a good time to bring it up, HD 4420. I think it's called something else now.
4139.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So can you just explain the bill for people who don't know, maybe are around the country, or if they live in Massachusetts and they want to get educated? Can you just explain that?
Kind of elevator pitch, kind of.
Yeah, the elevator pitch. Yeah, it's 100. It was originally 144 pages. Now, as written, it's 122, I think. So they were able to lop off 22 pages, which didn't do much. This bill was the largest and most comprehensive gun control bill in the history of our country anywhere. And I would argue that it is the most anti-civil rights bill ever been presented by any government anywhere in the history of our country. Wow. It really points a loaded gun at the most peaceful, law-abiding citizens in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which is the gun owner. And that is the only thing it seeks to affect. They use all this anecdotal evidence of crime as the reason why they need to affect the most peaceful, responsible, law-abiding citizens in Massachusetts. I'm like, that's a solution in search of a problem. Mm-hmm. If you restrict my right to keep and bear arms, it's not going to lower crime because I'm not the one out committing crime. It's not going to lower the murder rate because I'm not the one out committing murders. Mm-hmm. If you want to, have a true conversation about how to lower crime, I'm at the table. Let's talk. Mm-hmm. But if you want to just point the loaded gun at the most peaceful, law-abiding citizens in Massachusetts, I reject that. Number one. Number two, it's unconstitutional. Number three, the legislature doesn't possess the constitutional authority to do what they're doing. Mm-hmm. It is outside of their purview. There's constitutional limitations to their powers, and they cannot affect or deprive anyone of the right to keep and bear arms, or any right for that matter. So it's a much bigger issue. I think that the state is going to face some serious federal code violations because they are, in fact, going to deprive citizens of
their natural rights.
Yeah.
So, to zoom out a little bit, I know that's good, that's specifics to know that. But why do you think that? Do you think they're doing this out of a place of like, we're just trying to protect people, or do you think there's a more like sinister thing behind it? They want to be able to have tyranny, and do you think it's more of that, or do you think they're genuinely concerned and just ignorant to?
I think there's two schools there. I think the people who are sophisticated enough to write law and run a campaign and get elected and have gone through law school, and a lot of times they've graduated from pretty good law schools. I think there's something much more nefarious involved there. Mm-hmm. I don't think they're dumb. I don't think they're stupid. And I don't think they're just out to, they know that, they can look at the same data I look at and see that defensive gun use happens between 500,000 and 3 million times a year. And all they can do is point to the 15,000 undesired outcomes of deaths with firearms, 15 to 20,000 a year. But yeah, what about the 500,000 to 3 million times firearms are used for defensive gun uses a year? Like if you just do a risk versus reward type of thing, that far outweighs the negatives of firearms in our culture. But so I think that they are far sophisticated enough to understand, gun control doesn't reduce crime, and it's the death by 1,000 cuts. They really do have an agenda and want to see guns banned from our society, whether it's from a position of tyranny or from a position of ignorance. I don't know. I honestly think there's probably some people out there that understand full well the role of the Second Amendment as far as government and say, this is a safety relief valve for the people of America. That's what the founders' intent of the Second Amendment was. It was a tyranny relief valve, if you will, to make sure that what our founders just overthrew could never happen again in America. So when we surrender the right to keep and bear arms, now, we can muster down on town hall with our shovels and pitchforks, but it's not the same as having the same arms that our, government officials and military have. They do fear an armed uprising. I believe that. And that's a healthy thing for government to fear an armed uprising. I also think that there are those that just genuinely think if we can snap our fingers and make guns go away in society, we will be safer. And I'm sure there's a lot of people with some true intentions in their heart that think they're going to give money to organizations, they're going to lobby for this and that. to try to make guns go away, and that'll make the world a better place. But that's not reality. You can look at, and they love to say, oh, this is an American problem. No, it isn't. Like, we had one of the worst mass shootings in the history of the world happen in Paris, France, not too long ago, when they went to that theater and shot up a bunch of unarmed people. And they're using AK-47s, guns that have been banned outright for ownership in France forever. Like, there was no ever a path for ownership of that gun. We had one of the worst school shootings in Beslan, Russia. 330 odd children and people died in that, one of the worst shootings ever, again, because gun-free zones kill, in an area. We saw Brussels, Belgium on New Year's Eve a couple of years ago, where a guy drove a truck through a crowd and killed, dozens and dozens of people instantaneously and with great efficiency. This isn't a gun issue. This is a heart issue. People, there's evil in this world. And so even if you could snap your finger and make all the guns disappear from the bad guys and the good guys and everybody, and we all, pounded our guns into plowshares, which I believe will happen someday. But until then, like, you still have the heart of man to deal with it, and it's evil, and it's in some cases crazy, So that's
the point of justice that's the point of government, is to administer the justice towards the people who take advantage of others and those who have a crooked human heart and use that in a wrong way. That's the point of government, not to take it away from the good people who need that gun to protect themselves. Because, crazy thought, when you ban a gun, the law-abiding citizens who aren't going around hurting people are going to give up their guns, and the people who are already hurting other citizens beforehand are still going to get their hands on weapons. They're still going to, it'll just go to the black market.
Right.
Yeah. I think it's an idea of, like, they almost have a vision of a utopia of no guns at all. Like, somehow there's just going to magically be, like, if we have enough gun laws, certainly there'll be no guns, which is, like, it's impossible. Like, especially with the way the border is in Mexico, guns are coming up from there all the time, and they're not talking about that. They don't want to talk about that issue. So it's clearly a deflection, I feel like. And even the places that have the most gun crime, guns are already illegal. Like Chicago, you're not allowed to own a gun, and look at Chicago.
Yeah, the highest rates of crime, there's a couple of anomalies to that statistic, but John Lott wrote a book called More Guns, Less Crime, and I think he's on his 4th or 5th edition, because it keeps updating and it keeps proving the point over and over.
With new evidence.
So, with new evidence. And so the highest gun crime areas, like you said, are areas that it's hardest to acquire a firearm. And if you take the 10 highest gun crime cities out of the equation, then we are by far one of the safest places on earth. And that's 10 cities that are responsible for the vast majority of crime in this country. And so if you take those 10 out of the equation, we're like 182nd out of 212 countries on earth.
Yeah.
It's like we're at the bottom of the basement. But the bottom line is the most highly restrictive areas are usually some of the highest rates of gun crime. Then you have some of the most permissive states and areas have the lowest rates of gun crime. It's and I hate that word gun crime because really we don't use it in anything else. Like, we don't call baseball bat crime. We don't call it knife crime. We don't call it shod fist or shod foot and fist crime. We call it crime, right? And now all of a sudden when you put gun in there, it makes it sound so much more scary or whatever. And honestly, it is a more efficient tool than those other things I mentioned. However, it's not painting the true picture of what's going on in the society, because last couple of weeks I've heard repeated more often than ever how Massachusetts has one of the lowest gun-related deaths in the country. And they love to champion the fact that we have the most strict gun control laws. However, the thing they fail to mention is a lot of gun-related crime happens in our urban area near Boston and around there. And what do we have in Boston that most rural areas don't have? The greatest healthcare system in the world. We have hospitals everywhere, trauma centers. We have emergency rooms almost on every street corner around the, greater Boston area. So we have the best health, and a lot of people are actually getting treated and are surviving gun crime. But if you look at the rate of violent crime, Massachusetts leads New England.
Wow.
We have the highest rate of violent crime in New England.
Wow.
So you have Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont to our north, which are all constitutional carry states with a far lower violent crime statistic than Massachusetts. So we love to sit there and pound our chest that, because of our strict gun laws, we're the lowest gun-related deaths in the country. Okay, but we're the most violent state in New England. So it doesn't, you
Tell the
can't
whole
have
story.
it both ways.
It's the hard issue.
Yeah, it's the hard issue. So we're seeing a lot of crime in Massachusetts. Maybe they're not all dying. And if you look at the spike in gun-related deaths from 98, when the Gun Control Act that Massachusetts signed on to, we had a big gun bill in 98 that made our approved weapons roster and assault weapons ban and storage issues and all this stuff and testing of firearms, and made it more restrictive to own guns in the state. From 98 till now, we're up 120%. So, the gun crime, if you will, to use a bad phrase, has gone up year over year since 98, when the gun control was put into place. The most strict gun control in the nation almost was put into place. We've had a steady climb in gun crime.
So let's get into specifics about the bill and exactly what the bill is restricting. I mean, like you said, there's a lot of pages, over 100 pages of. It's essentially like an omnibus, like gun grab bill, essentially. Okay. So you had a video on your Cape Gunworks YouTube channel. Recommend it. Check it out. Where you broke down the 4420 gun bill, and you said something that just blew me away. You were standing right out there, and you said, to my right, if this bill passes, I will be able to sell almost none of the guns on this wall. Am I
right?
I'm quoting you right?
Yep.
And you said Michael Day's office, the Democrat who proposed the bill into the Massachusetts legislature, he asked Cape Gunworks to send him a list of the guns that you would no longer be able to sell if the bill passes. But you said in the video it would be easier for you to send a list of the guns that you could sell, because you said you could count them on two hands. Could you actually go through those guns? What guns would you be able to sell if and when this bill actually goes through?
Yeah, so I'm not even sure about these three.
Okay.
I think it's a solid 3, maybe 4 guns that I would be able to sell. And
That's insane.
As far as we're talking specifically semi-automatic rifles. So the 3 or 4 is, one is the Ruger PC carbine, which is a state compliant version, so it doesn't have any other evil feature, quote unquote, that they love to tout. So it wouldn't have a threaded muzzle, it wouldn't have a pistol grip, it wouldn't have a folding or collapsible stock or a detachable stock. So the reason I say maybe I'll be able to sell these is because of these 2 added features. Like the federal assault weapons ban had basically 5 or 6 features that they called evil features, and that was coined by Dianne Feinstein years ago. The whole gun ban was about features. It wasn't about a specific model of gun. That's how Maura Healey got it really wrong in 2016.
Okay.
So fast forward to now, they're adding features to this list. The original list was pistol grip, detachable magazine, bayonet lug, flash hider, folding or collapsible stock, grenade launcher, or I might be missing something.
That's pretty cool. Grenade launcher.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
So those 6 things, if you will. Now they've added thumb hole stock, vertical foregrip or angled foregrip, or a shroud that will protect your hand from being burnt if you're holding where the barrel is. A detachable stock, which means, I don't know. I'm in the gun business. I know a lot about guns. What is a detachable stock? As far as I can tell, every gun has a detachable stock.
Oh,
That means
yeah.
the gun separates from the action of the gun.
Yeah.
The stock, right? And I think I know what they're implying, and that is that the stock could be taken off to make it shorter overall length. But that's not what the law says. It says detachable stock. I mean, that's like grandpa's bolt action deer gun. If you can take that screw out of the bottom and separate it from the action of the gun, it has a detachable stock.
Yeah.
The people who write these laws don't understand what they're trying to do. You know?
Well, makes me wonder where they're getting it. But you said also in the video, you said if the bill passes, I won't be able to sell any semi-automatic weapon or rifle. I'm not really good with guns.
Rifle, yep.
Semi-automatic rifle that has a detachable magazine, which you did mention. I'm, like I said, support the Second Amendment. I don't really understand all the specifics of the terms that you're using. Does that literally just mean the magazine coming out of the gun?
Yeah.
That's all that is?
Yeah,
Isn't
so-
that every gun?
Yeah, pretty
Basically?
much. So that's why it's impossible for me to create a list because, again, the Ruger PC carbine, Ruger Mini 30, Ruger Mini 14, and the Springfield M1A and the New York, California configuration are the 4 guns that I've come up with that I might be able to continue to sell under the current proposed bill.
Gosh.
But again, those guns have this piece of plastic on top. So when you grip the gun out here to shoot it, you don't burn your hand.
Yeah.
So now does that make it an evil feature? So because it says shroud in the law. So it's like I've never seen a rifle with an exposed barrel with no type of handguard, if you will, at all. Never seen one. They all have a stock that goes out under the barrel so you can hold it and you don't burn your hand when you shoot it. So
Yeah. So if this law passes, is it just for the sale of guns? Like guns that already have been, people can keep the guns they already have, right? It's not.
that's a great question. Originally written, no. In HD 4420, there was no legacy or grandfathering provision.
So
And
they just
So you would
So-
have had to turn them in?
that's what they were proposing.
Wow.
And they wrote no guidance on that.
Wow.
This bill is really bad. It's 122 pages of poor planned. You wonder where they're getting this from. I think they're getting it from the wish list from gun rights groups. I mean, not gun rights, from gun ban groups
Yeah,
like
gun control.
Giffords or
Okay.
Bloomberg or Everytown or Moms Demand Action. There's about a bunch of them. And that's where they're getting this from. They're donors to their campaigns and they're getting their wish list package. And so they're writing it into law and they're encoding it into law. And so it creates more questions than answers. It's poorly written legislation that ends up with unenforceable, ambiguous laws that are unconstitutional, I might add.
Yeah.
So this is a categorical ban of an entire class of weapons, which is semi-automatic rifles, if it has a detachable mag and any other feature. So therefore, it's an entire category of gun. Ironically, I called Michael Day's office, spoke with Patrick, his aide, and that's the one who asked me to write this. When I went back to his office a couple weeks ago, the day they voted on this bill, I said, "Did you get my email?" And he said, "Yep." And I was really telling him how displeased I am that this is the final version of this bill that's going to be voted on today. This is horrific, as far as a rights bill, especially by someone who's a a civil rights advocate. That's what Michael Day touts himself as. He's a civil rights advocate. And so
I think that just means social justice warrior.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's all that means.
everything but the civil right,
Yeah.
the right to keep and bear arms and protect yourself. And I said, Patrick, this, I showed you what I would be able to sell. And he goes, that's not what I asked. You could have really helped us in this regard, Toby. He's trying to put this whole bill back on me and say, you could have helped me with this. And instead you chose to play games and do it this way. And I'm like, excuse me? No, I was legitimately telling you what I would be able to sell and everything else I won't.
Yeah.
So just look at your own bill. You enumerate dozens and dozens and dozens of guns that I won't be able to sell that are my bread and butter right now, that I sell to, because that's the only option, because you've already had this enforcement notice that came down in 2016 that cut off my primary source of income. So now you're trying to restrict it again, and now you're trying to project onto me how
It's your fault.
I could have done something about this. Meanwhile, I've been in open conversation with anyone who will listen, ever since I read the first day of this bill. Number two, he said that, and to answer your question, Hunter, I'm sorry, I'm so circuitous.
No, this is good.
But the original bill had no provision to keep your gun. The newer version, Michael Day expressed at the hearing, the hybrid hearing that we all attended, that it has not a true grandfathering provision, but it has a legacy provision, meaning you'll be able to keep it if the bill passes, which it did in the House, but you won't be able to sell it to someone. You won't be able to trade it in at the gun store. The gun store can't continue to sell that gun. It would have to be surrendered, sold out of state, or sold to a gun dealer, or sold to someone who's exempt, like a police officer. Yeah. And then on the House floor, the very next week, he testified in his speech that this is a true grandfathering provision, and you would be able to sell it to your friend, to your neighbor, to your uncle, to your father, give it to your kid, whatever. You'd be able to buy and sell any gun that's in the state prior to this date. And he even made it sound like we'd be able to sell the guns that we haven't been able to sell since 2016. All the guns that since the Moore-Healey edict that have been in circulation, but we haven't been able to sell them. If you own one, you can continue to sell it to your friend or whatever, but I can't sell them as a gun dealer because I had that gun put to my head by the Attorney General's office of a $10,000 fine and 10 years in jail and non-renewal. But he's making it sound like, oh yeah, you'll be able to sell anything that was in the state prior to this date. And, that was news to me. His aide also told me that same thing. I have not found that language in this 122 pages. So he was either lying or mistaken.
Or didn't read the bill.
Or didn't read his own bill. It's
122 pages. It's like, how can you expect the average gun owner, the average person to even know, read the law jargon and know what the law even means? It's like you're making the law impossible to even follow in the first place.
And our laws are already that way in the state of Massachusetts. Now it's going to... It wasn't just a doubling down on bad law. It was to the power of 10. This makes it 10 times worse. It makes it impossible to comply with the law. And all law that makes you a criminal overnight by doing nothing is bad law. That should never, ever, ever be a thing in our history, in our society. And that's what a lot of this law does. It's very ambiguous. It's vague. There's a lot of other things, but I think the most egregious is the categorical ban of an entire class of weapons, which, by the way, the Heller decision in 2015, that's what that whole thing was about. They had banned handgun ownership in Washington, D.C. So Rich Heller sued for his right to keep and bear arms, and they agreed with him and said, yeah, you can't ban an entire category of guns. And there you have it, So, yeah. But here we are, another categorical ban of firearms.
Yeah, the optimist in me wants to say that there's no way that this bill, if it gets passed, that the courts would allow it, or even how is a local police department even going to enforce the bill? Have they, I don't know, I know in some other states that there's been bills that the Senate has proposed and the police officers have said, or the sheriffs have said, we're not going to enforce this bill if you do it. I don't know, what is the state of it like in Massachusetts?
There's a couple of town police chiefs that have come out and said, we will not enforce this, which is huge. Ware
That's
Police
awesome.
Department, Plymouth Police Department, Plymouth County Sheriff's Department. But more importantly is there's 351 towns in Massachusetts. Every single police chief in the state of Massachusetts opposes this bill.
Wow.
Every single
351 to 0.
Wow.
And 100 police chiefs from campuses, from school, university campuses. So that's a total of 451 to 0.
That is mind-blowing.
That's amazing.
All oppose it, and yet they don't care. They didn't listen to it. And these are the people who actually have to enforce it.
Yeah.
And it gets better because the implications of passing unconstitutional law trickles down to the people who have to enforce the law. Mm-hmm. if you enforce unconstitutional law, your qualified immunity can be taken away.
Yeah, because you're not upholding your oath. Yeah.
Right. If you deprive someone of their constitutionally protected rights under the color of law, you can have your immunity stripped. Now, the legislature is immune to that because in the Constitution, there was provision where they can't be sued for making law because they're always going to have somebody upset at them. Somewhere out there's a murderer mad that it's illegal to commit murder, right?
Yeah.
So it's pretty obvious why we as a society need to make sure murder's not a thing. And so they can't be sued for creating law. However, I mentioned that federal code, it's called 18 USC section 242 of official U.S. law and code that says no official or I'll just boil it down to official. It lists a long list of what the official is. Acting in their official capacity under the color of law may deprive someone of their constitutionally protected rights, state or federal constitutionally protected rights. And so if they do, it can be as simple as a fine, depending on what it is, all the way up to the death penalty. If somebody's life was lost in the process.
Yep.
When I testified before the House, I said that. I said, you guys are actually walking a fine line here. Number one, you're violating your oath of office. Number two, you don't have the constitutional authority to do what you're doing because of the constitutional limitations. And number four, you're running up against U.S. Code Title 18, Section 242, which, frankly, I would not want to be in that chair and high-fiving each other saying we did it when you get the lawsuit that might come your way or worse. And I don't know of a situation where public officials have ever been tried under that. I'm sure you'd have to get a complicit Justice Department to bring charges, which is highly unlikely. But, if people start dying because politicians make it harder and harder to exercise their right to keep and bear arms, and it's well documented, somewhere along the line, you'll get a prosecutor who will take the case. And I wouldn't want to be in their shoes if that heads down that road.
No kidding. So it seems like the ruling class is their will for the future of Massachusetts is completely at odds with the will of the people, because you've got elected representatives on Beacon Hill in Boston, and then you've got sheriffs, who that is an elected position, I believe.
It is, yeah.
All across the state, not one is supporting this bill. Where is the disconnect between the people and the rulers that they elected to supposedly represent them?
That's a great
Why is there a
question.
disconnect?
Yeah,
Like what happened? Where?
Well, I think it's the root cause of the whole question is we know better than you. Like we can, I know you think you want that, but let us protect you from yourself.
Yeah.
That's the mindset of the ruling class, if you will, or those elected officials. They, that's what, and it's kind of inherent with the job, right? You're making laws that are supposed to better society. So you have that kind of nanny state mentality to begin with, and now we're talking about something like a firearm, and that's real easy to get emotionally worked up and stand in the graves of those who've been killed. But the bottom line is they're going to do it because they want to do it. And this is all a result of the Speaker of the House, Ron Mariano. He kind of wants to make this his legacy, That's the way he is. And they're never happy with the amount of legislation that's proposed. It's just the stepping stone approach. They're trying to get to total gun confiscation and gun ban. And I've been saying that since I became a gun owner in '93, and everyone's like, no one's coming for your gun. Like, that's ridiculous. We just want to have common sense gun laws in this country, in this state. Nobody is coming after your guns. Well, we went from that to, hell yeah, we're coming for your AK-47s and your AR-15s. Like, they're saying the quiet part out loud now.
Yeah.
And now it's just, yep, we're coming for AKs, we're coming for ARs, we're coming for high-capacity magazines. And, that is completely unconstitutional. And they don't even try to hide it. And unfortunately, the people where I think the biggest disconnect, and this is kind of circling back to your question, is, we live in a very liberal, very democratic controlled state. And I would say even those who are very liberal and Democrat that believe in the Second Amendment, they're probably 5 or 6, maybe 8 or 9 on their list of highest priorities. Whereas true gun rights advocates or very conservative people, even if they don't choose to protect themselves with arms, it's in the top 2 or 3. In some cases, it's the top 1, because some people have a level of understanding that once the Second Amendment falls out of the way, everything else, there's no relief valve in place to prevent total tyranny from taking over, which then, if they can take away the Second Amendment, they can easily take away all the other rights because no one has a way to fight
The second
back.
protects all the other ones.
Correct,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it makes you thank God for the Constitution that we have these things in place that the sheriffs can step up and say we're not going to enforce it. So I think that we should note that. But what is a way you think like an average person who disagrees with this bill, what can they do to stop it?
At this point, the fight is in the Senate. So the House has already passed it. Number one, take everybody to task who voted for this. There was 120 to 45, I think, is what or 120 to 40 was how 120 for it. Those 120 should not get their job back.
No, they should all be primaried.
They should be primaried, and they should be ousted from their position. Obviously, that's not going to happen in all 120 cases, but I would love to see that, especially the primary and a good opponent in the general against Michael Day and Ron Mariano and the big ones, all the people that were in on this early. And but right now the focus has shifted to the Senate. It's going to get sent to the Senate. Senate has said that they're going to take this up in January. They're going to take from now till January to write their version of the law, and everything's going to be done behind closed doors in conference and to reconcile the bill with the House. Unfortunately, that's the way it's going to go. So we really need to harp on this with our state senators and make sure that they know, don't touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Do you think this will survive in the courts? I wanted to bring up because you brought up the Eller decision?
The Heller.
Excuse me. There was another one called the Bruen decision out of New York.
Yep.
And I was reading, as I was researching the bill, the origin of the bill, it came up that this was a more conservative perspective on this article, but it said that Michael Day, he used this opportunity almost as, how do I say it, like out of retaliation against what the Supreme Court did in the Bruen decision. He just put all the chips in the table in HD 4420. Which, by the way, is called the modernization of firearm laws. Right. So can you explain the origin of that? The Bruen. Can you explain what the Bruen decision is, and then how that affected this bill here in Massachusetts?
Yeah. So that's exactly what this is. It's a temper tantrum from the Bruen ruling that came down in June of 2022, and that was the NYSERPA, the New York State Rifle and Pistol Association, versus Bruen, who's the Attorney General in the state of New York. So basically, they had a licensing scheme that is very similar to ours. It's a May issue. So you had to have a proper cause in order to exercise your right to keep and bear arms in New York, just like you did in Massachusetts, Maryland, California. There's 7 or 8 different locations, Washington, D.C. again. So it was like 7 or 8 or 9 localities in the country that all had this similar language, and it's May issue. Basically, if you could prove that you were being followed home by trained assassins and they were going to wipe you and your family out, or you had some other reason for wanting to own a gun, then they might issue you a license. That was really the way it worked. And that you couldn't exercise your right to keep and bear arms without that license.
So it's not a right at that point.
It's not a right,
Yeah.
it's a privilege. And so they challenged it and won. And basically the whole Bruen case is an affirmation of the Heller case. Heller was good law. The problem with the Heller decision was it just stated this. You know, it was nuanced beyond just you can't categorically ban a gun for ownership. It really went into the weeds on it, but then it just stopped at that. So in a post-Heller world, hundreds of lawsuits popped up, but there were very few Second Amendment victories because they just didn't instruct the lesser courts or the inferior courts on how to rule on Second Amendment cases at this point. So when the Bruen decision came down, they said, what you're doing is unconstitutional. The Second Amendment is a right to keep and bear arms, not just in the house, but outside the house. You can carry a gun, and you don't need, if you're going to have a license, it has to be a must issue if you're not a federally prohibited person. And they didn't even get into the weeds on whether or not the licensing part of it is constitutional. All they said was, if they're not a prohibited person, they have to be able to exercise the right to keep and bear arms. But then they took it a step further. Clarence Thomas wrote in his majority opinion that the interest balancing approach, or the two-step approach, or the tiers of scrutiny approach of writing law according to the Second Amendment, which is a two-step process. So you write the law, you have the text and the history and the tradition of the law, but then the legislature wants to, through interest balancing or tiers of scrutiny, or through, because it's the will of the people, they want to change something or add to it or attach conditions upon it, like licensing or like bans on specific guns or capacity of magazines and stuff like that. And Clarence Thomas said that is one step too many. You can no longer have a two-step approach. You must use strict scrutiny as it pertains to the Second Amendment, which is really important.
For sure.
No other law, no other constitutional amendment is given the type of scrutiny that the Second Amendment was, which was just the will of the people, or it's in the interest of our communities that we want to restrict this because guns bad and they kill people. So no one would subject any other right to those conditions. We would never say you got to have a license to go to church. We would never say, we're going to pass a law that says you got to put a plaque on your house that says you have license number 14260, which is good for 5 years to protect you against illegal searches and seizures. So when the police come to your door, they see your plaque and go, okay, they're good, let's go to the next house. We would never tolerate that. But we've been tolerating that with the Second Amendment for decades. And Bruen put an end to that and said, now you have the text of the Constitution, or the text of the Bill of Rights, is your primary focus. If it restricts it in the text, you can restrict it. If it doesn't, you can't. Then there's a second approach, and it's the government now has to have the burden of proof to prove that there was a historical tradition or analog at the time of the ratification of the Second Amendment in 1791. So if you want to go outside the text, which by the way says shall not be infringed.
Pretty obvious.
If you want to go outside of the words of those 26 or 27 words of the Second Amendment, then you have to show historical analog and tradition at the time of the founding or the time of the ratification in 1791. That's it. If you can't prove it existed then, it is unconstitutional. So all gun control bills, including this 122 pages of drivel, their days are numbered.
One thing.
Go ahead.
Continue.
I was just going to say their days are numbered, and it will all go by the wayside someday. The problem is you got to sue and have standing and all that. So
Yeah, another thing that I saw in the bill, which was like, because like I said, I don't know as much about the specifics of the types of the models of guns or the aspects of a gun. But one thing that I did understand, I was like, this is crazy, was that without the consent of the property owner, it would be illegal to carry your weapon, even concealed, as far as I can tell, on private property. Is that true?
it's true for a domicile in this bill,
Okay.
which they're trying to expand the sensitive places. So, in the Bruen decision, it wasn't in the majority opinion, it was in the concurrence that Kavanaugh wrote. He talked about sensitive places, and he said, like, oh yeah, there's sensitive places has to be limited to like a school or a airport, and you can't rule like entire areas as a sensitive place. Well, once again, our legislature and all of its wisdom is trying to expand sensitive places to now include a person's home, so that you'd need to get permission from them if you wanted to carry a gun on their property. They also are expanding it to polling places, which I find incredibly ironic, that as you go to exercise your right to vote, you can't exercise your right to keep and bear arms. It's maddening.
We've got to let you go in a couple of minutes, but I wanted to do a little thought experiment first, because I want to know how far like we go, because I always wonder about the line of, because it says the right to keep and bear arms. Mm-hmm. So what do you think about recreational bazookas? Do you think constitutionally we have the right to recreational bazookas? Because it says keep and bear arms, and that would...
No, it's a fair question, and there's a case in Chicago right now that is at I think it's the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, that will go to the Supreme Court. That'll be the next case, in my opinion, that will end up at the Supreme Court. And that's what they spent like the majority of the time, like asking the pro 2A lawyers was like, all right, so what about tactical nukes? What about surface to air missiles? What about tanks? What about, and the bottom line is, from what I can tell from the Constitution, it's the right to keep and bear arms. So bearable arms are something you can carry, you can hold, you can use efficiently. I'm sure there's legal scholars that could break down the word bear to what that encompasses. I don't think it includes tactical nukes. I don't think it includes surface-to-air missiles.
But bazookas, maybe.
Bazookas, maybe.
You can hold them.
The thing is, there's gun control is a term that I don't like, that everybody is on that spectrum, if you will. Mm-hmm. Like my buddy says, none of us want machine gun vending machines in the elementary schools, right? Mm-hmm. Fair to say?
Fair.
Yeah,
fair.
I think that's good. So yeah, we don't want that. So that means we're in favor of some sort of gun control, right? Then on the other end, it's total ban on anything that's sharp and pointy, right?
Yeah.
But somewhere there is the intent of our founders. Mm-hmm. So what is the intent of our founders? It was to dissuade tyrants. It was to be a tyrant relief valve, is what I like to call it.
That's good.
It's a deterrence from people who would become tyrannical. And I don't think politicians wake up in the morning like, today's the day. I'm going to conquer the world and I'm going to rule. I don't think that's something that happens. I think it happens through generations and through decades of politics and this consummation of power. And then all of a sudden, like, whoa, wait, I can't lose out on this little area over here. So for the reasons of deterring federal government from becoming tyrannical, I think that we should be able to own military weapons. A lot of times you hear people say, like, you really want people running around with machine guns. It's like, well, does the government have them? Does the military, do the police have them? Mm-hmm. If they do, then we need equal access
it's interesting
to match what our government could ultimately impose upon us.
Those same people are usually the ones who have a distrust for police and military too.
Right.
So it's kind of a good way to point out.
Yeah, and Mark Smith, he's a Second Amendment scholar. He's an amazing guy. He has a YouTube channel called The Four Boxes Diner, and he just did a pretty comprehensive video about First Responders Day. And he actually said that's a disingenuous term. Nothing against police and fire and medical. They're awesome. They're heroes. But really, the average person is the first responder, right?
Yeah.
The people who die in mass shootings or find themselves in mass shootings are the first responders. They're on the scene first, and they have to deal with it. So for that reason, if you're allowing your police and your military to have AR-15s or M16s or high capacity magazines, then you must let the people have them, because they're the ones that find themselves in the face of evil before anybody.
Yeah.
And if we're not there if we're not going to be able to protect ourselves because we've been disarmed or our arms have been restricted unconstitutionally, then I think government is complicit in that, however the cards fall as a result.
So at the end of the day, the people have the right to keep and bear arms and to defend themselves against a tyrannical government. It's not so we can go hunting.
Right.
It's to protect ourselves against a tyrannical government. Mm-hmm. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for this, Toby, coming on the podcast and kind of having your expert opinion. I would love to actually have you back on after it's voted on in the Senate. Mm-hmm. We're going to continue to talk about this, but I'd really like to get your opinion on the fallout of it after.
Sure.
As it goes to Maura Haley's desk to be signed, if it does pass the Senate. But before you go, just kind of shameless plug. Where can people find you? Your gun store. You're running for local office.
Mm-hmm. No, I appreciate that. You can find me all over the internet if you look up Cape Gun Works on all of our social media channels. We're at all the big tech ones, plus some of the alternative ones like Telegram and Truth and Rumble and whatnot. So you can find us on X and YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. We have two different sets of social media. One is Cape Gunworks and one is Rapid Fire Radio.
Okay.
Rapid Fire is a weekly radio podcast we do, all things Second Amendment. So that comes out every Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern from 4 to 6. And you can subscribe if you go to our website, rapidfireradio.us, sign up to be alerted whenever we go live. And then we also have social media around that, Rapid Fire Radio. But yes, you mentioned I'm running for local politics, town council. So I have electtobyleary.com, and I have a Toby Leary for town council Facebook page. So
And what town is that in?
That's in West Barnstable. So
Okay.
Precinct 11 is West Barnstable in the town of Barnstable. A lot of people could get really confused about that. But that election is less than a week away. So
Wow.
November 7th will be
Awesome.
election day. So
electtobyleary.com. You
That's
got
right.
Rapid Fire Radio, Cape Gunworks. Make sure to check them out. As always, I am your host, Sam Mealy,
I'm Hunter Young.
and we are the Sons of Liberty.